get excited literally every time that I sit down to play a $10,000 tournament. It's hard to describe the sensations, the perceptions, the anticipation that goes into this, and most of the time when I play a 10K, it's just the main event. You know it's going to be nuts. But deciding to play the Win Millions $10,000 buy-in event was no easy decision. I had planned out my summer series tournaments primarily at the Win Venetian. I had seen this one and it seemed like it would probably be good value, but I just wasn't sure it made a ton of sense. First of all, I never buy into 10Ks just on my own dime. I'm not really rolled for that in the slightest, so I don't take shots quite that big. I do sell action, and I mostly do that in my Discord. People were more interested than I thought, so I decided to take the plunge, seeing that the $10 million guarantee would basically guarantee a field of 1,000 runners in this 10K, and I was pretty sure that meant it was going to be good. It's always a little daunting rolling up with $10,000 in hundreds, that is literally 100 $100 bills, and setting up to buy in. But sitting down, looking around the table, I felt good, I felt in my element, and I was ready to play my game. Playing the very first hand of an event is always a little bit weird, but here we go. 100, 100, 100 blinds, 40K in the stack, which is the starting stack, of course. 5-handed because some people don't like showing up on time for 10Ks for some reason, and the low jack makes it 300. I'm on the button with King Queen offsuit, and while I think this is probably a mix between a 3-bet and a call, the aforementioned jitters set in maybe a little bit here, and I decided to just call, where I'd probably more often 3-bet this combo. The big blind calls as well, so we go 3 ways to this flop, which is king high. You love to see it. Early on in the event, just making a top pair that's likely to be good is pretty nice. Gets even better as the big blind checks and the low jack c-bets for 500. I decided to just call here. While I could put in some raises for slightly thin value, there's not a lot of draws I would raise here, and the low jack has a pretty significant range advantage, so I elect to just call. The big blind comes along as well, and the turn is the 8 of diamonds, putting a diamond draw on board. They both check to me, and now I'm very confident my hand is good the vast majority of the time, so I put out a small bet of 1.2k, just trying to get value from a worst king, maybe pocket pairs under a king, and some diamond draws where maybe there was a pair with it or something like that. The big blind is the only caller, so we go heads up to a river, which is the 4 of diamonds. He checks, and now I have a pretty interesting decision here between bet and check. I think that this is a card that I'll be perceived to check back a lot, and so when he checks and doesn't lead himself, I kind of eliminate flushes for the most part. I also think there's still a bunch of worse king X specifically in his range, so I decided to go for a bet of 3.5k, targeting those, and he calls. However, he has a hand I didn't really put in range when he overcalls flop, and that's 8-6 of clubs, so we're going to lose the very first one here and get cut down quite a bit in the very first hand. Luckily, we start very deep stacked in this, 400 blinds, and that's something that's going to really help us out as far as like losing the first one and just shaking it off. 35k in the stack in this next hand. We're at the same blind level, and something I forgot to mention about this event is that there are 60-minute levels, which, yeah, that's not the main event with its 2-hour-long levels, but this is going to be pretty good and allow us to maneuver pretty well, not get too crazy early on. We're in the hijack with 4-3 of clubs and open it up to 300. However, the cutoff, the button, the small blind, and the big blind all call. The flop comes king, 10, 3, and this is just not the scenario I'd envisioned in my mind with the 4-3 of clubs. Kind of picturing something more like a, I don't know, like a 7, a 6, a 5. Maybe put them in clubs, you know, just for good measure. But anyway, I digress. It checks to me, and there's just no way I can possibly bet this hand. Yeah, we technically have a backdoor flush draw with our pair, but it's not even a good backdoor flush draw. It's easy for somebody to have a king or a 10 in a backdoor flush draw and us to just be in terrible shape. Checks around, and the turn is somewhat good, 4 of spades. The big blind now leads for 1.1k. I call, and everyone else folds. I don't think we really have to raise here. I don't know what we really rep, and it's a little bit hard to see exactly what we get value from besides like a pretty strong king. We can also still be beat here at a decent frequency. The river is a 7 of diamonds here, and he checks, so I go for value, making it 2.7k, thinking he usually has a weak king, maybe some kind of 10, and then occasionally a misdraw. However, he bumps it up to 15k, and in 40 minutes playing this event, he hasn't seen a flop until this one. It's really hard to see what he's repping at all, and I do figure that I don't look like I'm repping much myself. Being the preflop aggressor, checking back, calling turn, and finding a river bet is just very weird in terms of my line. So I really debate here. I really consider just calling, but it's a very significant portion of stacks. He has to be somewhat competent or rather crazy to find a bluff here. And again, he just hasn't seen a flop yet. So I just lean into the live pool tendencies and find a fold, not expecting this to be a bluff in level 1. However, later on in the event, I'm led to believe that this was the wrong fold against his hand, although I think with my information at the time, it's pretty defensible. In this next hand, I've actually won some small pots, so I'm actually chipped up here, even though I lost that previous hand, sitting on 36k at the 100, 200, 200 level, finally into level 2. I open ace queen of clubs and the hijack to 600 and the cutoff small blind and big blind call. You might notice a trend that in a lot of higher buy-in events, you won't see a lot of multi-way pots. They're mostly heads up or take it down pre, and there's a lot more 3-betting than flatting pre. Not the case in this 10k. And it's really starting to solidify the reasoning behind playing it, that the guarantee was so big, that the WSOP had been pushed off, and so people were pretty excited and itching to play this big event. But anyway, we open the ace queen of clubs and the flop comes ace 8-5 2 clubs. This is a pretty ideal scenario, and I think that I kind of mess up when it checks to me, c-betting only 800. The issue here is that when I'm multi-way, I just won't find a lot of c-bets here, which means I probably don't want to go too small. Plus, the board is quite coordinated, although my reasoning at the time was that I just kind of had the board crushed. Given that club draws aren't a concern, I decided to go small, but I think it's a mistake. And on top of that, every single player calls. So we somehow are playing a 5-way turn, which is the deuce of diamonds. Checks to me, and at this point, I'm kind of thinking I need to slow down and pot control a little bit. It's not a word I use that often, but multi-way, I shouldn't really be overvaluing one pair too much. And even though this brings in some additional draws and only 3-4 comes in to beat us, or I guess ace deuce as well, beating us of hands that weren't already beating us, I'm just not loving this scenario, so I check. Checks around, and the river is the 8 of spades. Pretty gross spot because some second pairs could certainly call, but the second pair you'd expect to call would not be in the big blind, and it's the big blind who's doing the betting for 1.2k. Especially with this small size, I think he's usually got an ace weaker than mine where he's trying to buy showdown, so I decided to go for some thin value here and make it 6k. However, the cutoff cold calls, and the big blind now makes it 16k. I am not loving life here. It really sucks to get to the river and just get raised or 3-bet every single time, but I think we really have to find the fold here. We really only beat bluffs, and players have to be pretty suicidal here, I think, to bluff into 2 opponents on the river with a 3-bet. So I fold. The cutoff somehow finds a call with a worse ace than mine, and the big blind has 4-3 offsuit for the straight. So pretty unfortunate exact set of circumstances, and we just got to shake this one off, come back to it with a fresh head. I'm pretty sure there's at least one break in between here, and we come back to 200, 300, 300 with 28k in the stack. What's crazy is we're down to something like 60 or 70% of the starting stack, but we still have almost 100 blinds, 2 levels past the first level. 7-handed currently, and an active player who just got it in for 50 big blinds effective with ace-queen offsuit opens to 900. I'm in the cutoff with ace-king offsuit and bump it up to 3.1k. Happy to see him call or even 4-bet. It folds around to him, and he does in fact 4-bet, going pretty large to 14k. There's not really any way against this size that I can just flat. It makes no sense with this hand. The SPR would be absolutely tiny, meaning that the stack we have behind relative to what's in the pot converted to a ratio is just going to be way too small. We're not going to have any options post. So I just jam it in there, and he snaps with ace-king offsuit. Same hand. The board rolls out ace 8-3 king brick without much of a sweat, and we chop it up. 31k now in the stack at the same blind level, and early position bumps it up to 800. I'm in the cutoff with king 9 of hearts, and I could 3-bet this or call, but I choose to call here. The flop comes 9-6 deuce with 2 diamonds. He bets 1k, and I think we could find some raise some of the time, but against early position, I'd rather just call here. So that's what I do, and the turn comes the 8 of diamonds. He checks, and now I want to protect my equity, get a little bit of value from under pairs or worse 9x, so I bet 2.1k, and he calls. River is the 8 of clubs, so if he ever just has like 7-8 here, ace 8, he sometimes improves, and I'm not really sure what we can get value from. particularly when there's 3 diamonds on board. I think it would be an overplay to bet this for value. So when he checks, I check it back and he announces king high. So my hand's going to be good here, and we're finally taking down a significant pot in this 10K buy-in. 200, 400, 400 blinds now, 27K in the stack, and the cutoff bumps it up to 1.5K, which you notice is pretty big. It's almost 4 bigs. I'm in the big blind with black pocket 8s, and so I don't see much point in doing anything here other than calling. The flop comes king 6 deuce rainbow. I check. He bets 800, which is a significant down bet, especially considering how big he made it pre. I make an easy call. The turn is the jack of spades, and it goes check, check. On the river ace, this really completes a ton of hands in his range. He's probably range betting this flop when he bets this size. Turn, he often has a jack that's picked up or an underpair. And on an ace, pretty much everything that he's checking for showdown value on turn now also gets there. Besides being a couple hands like pocket 7s, pocket 5s, and so on, this is not a good spot for me, but I also don't have a good candidate to bluff. So I check, he bets 2.5K, and I'm just not really sure what's going on here. I think that he has ace-x in range, but looking at him, I don't feel like he's that strong. It almost feels like he just wants me to fold a hand exactly like I have. Not a thing that I would really recommend calling light here. I mean, everything I said analysis-wise would generally point to a fold at this point, but I don't think he is thin value betting a jack here. And just from him not betting the turn, I don't think he is a king all that often either. So in one sense, he's kind of polarized to an ace or a bluff or something that's just trying to like weirdly set his price, even though he's in position. So it doesn't really add up to me. I ended up making the call, and I do beat pocket 5s, but I, again, don't really think from an analysis perspective that this is all that standard. It's kind of just one of those feel things from being in the game with him. 34K now in the stack at the same blind level. Early position bumps it up to 1K, a much more normal size than in the previous hand. I'm in the big blind with ace-jack offsuit, and if this were against a later position open, we could consider 3-betting, but against early position, this is a call all day. The flop comes ace-9 4 two-tone. I check. He bets 1.2K, and we love to see it because our hand is like pretty much the top of range when it comes to just one pair. I happily make the call, and the turn is the 9 of hearts, showing us that pairing the board is just a standard in this event, apparently. I check, and he now bets 2.4K. I think this is a pretty easy call still. While the 9 does introduce some possibilities for us to chop with weaker aces, we can't chop yet. And there's only a couple hands I think here that beat us, as I don't see many 9x betting the flop. I decided to make the call, and the river is a king of hearts, which we hate to see. It does bring in the backdoor flush, which he could have several of betting flop, and continuing on the turn. And as well, we now chop with every single ace in the deck, besides ace king, ace 9, and ace 4. Actually, we still chop with ace 4. Disregard that. The river king of hearts, again, I check and he checks it back. We chop with ace 10. So really not getting much going here in this event. It feels like the times when we did have somebody, they're either getting there or getting the chop, but you just got to shake these off. We're still super deep here. And in the next hand, which is still at the same blind level, but we have chipped down a bit here playing some small pots, we have 27K. The low jack makes it 1.1, and I'm in the cutoff with ace king of clubs and happily bumped it up to 3.1K. The button, who is a pretty fun player, very recreational, and doing a lot of cold calling of 3-bets, finds a cold call. The big blind, who's a competent player, finds a cold call. The low jack, who is the opener, finds the call. This one's warm though, not a cold call. The flop comes out queen 7-3 with 2 spades, and this is a pretty interesting scenario. I do have a hand that in a heads-up pot with very deep stacks would be a pretty good candidate to go after and potentially just barrel all the way off. Queen high boards don't get barreled all the time, but with a backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw, I think it would be reasonable. However, we're now going to this pot 4 ways, and it's very bloated with over 12K in the middle. I do decide to go for the c-bet here for 4.5K, but frankly, I think it's potentially a mistake. I think balancing here is a little bit tough. We'll definitely have ace queen here. We'll have kings plus. We'll have jacks and 10s, but I'm not sure multi-way if jacks and 10s should even be bets. So maybe ace king with a backdoor flush draw is not the worst, but I think a smaller size is potentially called for when multi-way. The button snap makes it 25K, and if you remember, he's one of the fun players. However, when it folds to me, I just don't think we can really get away with continuing here. We're going to have to commit basically our whole stack if we do, and we just have no reasoning to think that he's super wide here besides specifically having spades. Plus, given that the queen is not a spade, it's very easy for him to just have top pair and a flush draw. When I do fold, he flashes me pocket queens with the queen of spades. So we're in pretty dire straits here. Very, very lucky that he didn't choose to 4-bet pre, because if he did, I would just be shipping it all in pre or flatting and losing even more than I already did here. So pretty unfortunate. Unfortunate as well, because we've given away now pretty much 8K in this hand off of our 20K stack, and we go down several blind levels without playing really any more interesting hands. I believe the blinds are something like 300, 600, or 400, 800 now, and I have a 3-bet sort of stack. I end up 3-bet jamming queen jack of spades, and I get cold called by this recreational player who's cold called essentially every single 3-bet. Granted, he's pretty much always had it, and that's pretty much what happens here. My 20 big blinds are in the middle, and he shows us ace queen offsuit. The board is devoid of a jack, devoid of spades, devoid of anything that could possibly help us, and we are out of this 10K buy-in. It's always pretty disappointing going into such a large buy-in that ends up having a pretty soft field and just never getting anything going. I think I literally never got above starting stack, and that can be a little demoralizing. Now, granted, it's a little bit easier right after you've won 57K, fully on your own dime, not selling action and then going into a bigger buy-in with action sold, but it still hurts, and I much rather prefer to return money to investors. Unfortunately, that can't always happen, and this is the true variance of tournament poker. It's really easy to see, big finishes on YouTube or on Twitch or on social media. Those are what get hyped up, but these sort of standard-ish tournaments where not much goes well, or it goes kind of average, but it's not good enough to cash, that's really the reality a lot of the time. And reminding ourselves of this is going to be really important for maintaining our sanity in general, but especially in poker. My phone literally keeps overheating, so I'm going to stop trying to record. But basically, what can you do? You fire a 10K, you lose, and it is what it is. Shout out to all my backers, by the way, who bought a piece. But yeah, rough one. Going to shake it off, play an 800 tomorrow, and then get into the big ones coming up soon. See you guys there.